Drumming has been a part of Urel Lashley's life from childhood. Born on the south side of Chicago, he soon became a world traveler, following his family to Africa.
I had been introduced to the djembe drum from West Africa when I was in Liberia when I was about 6. And I took some lessons from a guy over there, master drummer, and got my first taste sort of the power of the sound. But I got back, I didn't necessarily pursue that. I think for me, people think, oh, it's the instrument, you know, you hear something and you just fall in love with it. I don't necessarily know. I think it's also about the timing and the readiness to just employ that kind of discipline.
Urel didn't return to drumming for years until he started attending UW-Madison. While he was exploring music, he also discovered another passion in his life.
By the time I finished graduate school in '98, I was very seriously into drumming. I was practicing, 5-6 times a week, playing wherever I could. My first job was a work-study job that I got at the South Madison Neighborhood Center, which now is a Boys and Girls Club. And then I moved over to the Wilmar Neighborhood Center where I worked for years. And that was my first experience with youth work. And I discovered that, I really enjoyed young people and being sort of a teacher to them. And I was also doing the drumming at the same time. And I started thinking, well, maybe I could teach drumming. And so I started to essentially work backward.
What Urel didn't know is that it would evolve into something bigger: Drum Power. Drum Power is a youth leadership program that uses West African, Afro-Cuban, and Afro-Brazilian percussion. And it's not just drumming. Dancing is a must.
I like to move my body. It feels good to me, and it's not necessarily hard. And another skill, like sometimes now the drums, I'm like, they seem to get a little stale and worn out. All right, let's put the drums down. We're gonna dance now. And then so we do that. And so it feels like having a whole nother trick.
We're going right first.
But it feels like a whole other thing is opened up that's super fun to me, but also a way of connecting to young people.
It's more than just music. It also teaches skills based on the 3 pillars of discipline, community, and leadership.
So Drum Power is a program that teaches those 3 skills through music and in a practice way that they're always present. We explicitly try to create an atmosphere where that can be comfortable and safe. I expect them to always be disciplined. That doesn't mean perfect, but that's the standard. The standard is to use your energy for good things. The results are going to be good things, positive outcomes.
Every summer, Urel hosts a drum and dance camp on the campus of UW-Madison. The 3-week camp teaches children and young adults empowerment through drumming and dancing.
Drum Power Drum and Dance Camp is the only thing I'm willing to do that is truly about just exploration. That is designed to be an opportunity for young people to enjoy fun, hanging out with each other and learning together, and to learn and explore a vast array of cultural traditions that are not primarily non-Western in focus. But it was amazing to see that sort of develop over time and people figure, because I wanted to be a nurturing place.
While teaching music and life skills is important to Urel, it's more than that. It's helping them find their voice.
It's not how tight the arrangement is or whether they don't make mistakes. It's the smiles and moments of triumph that I can see on their faces and sort of in their spirits and in the way they hold their bodies. And my goal never is to train drummers. Like, I don't care if these kids want to play the drum in 2 years. But I do care if they have discipline, community, and leadership, and they understand what that is and how that can work for them. Whatever the road they traveled, they were able to find something powerful. Their power, not my power, theirs.
Hold the stick.
All right, hello everybody. So I decided to show the video just really because the picture is really worth 1,000 words in my view. And I want you to see the young people and hear their sounds, hear the music we make together, and really get to see sort of what that really looks and feels like. Drum Power has worked with more than 3,900 students since starting in 2001 in Harlem, New York City, where it began, and has had a presence in there, and also Denver, Colorado, and Madison, Wisconsin as of 2010. So centering the whole child for me really has meant providing a space to practice and learn life skills through music. And for me, that's been West African, Afro-Cuban, Afro-Brazilian drumming, more specifically. And then we've added dance more recently too, which means really learning specifically drum skills, but also it means focusing on social emotional skills, which for us are discipline, community, and leadership. And I'll show you a little bit of how we envision that. So discipline is using your energy for good things. So again, very much focused on action. Community, supporting my own learning and the learning of others. And then leadership, doing the right thing even when I have to do it by myself, and especially when no one is watching. And these concepts live in all the routines, activities, learning goals, and personal goals we set in class. And we make a commitment at the beginning to struggle, to fail, but also to triumph together around these ideas and really in service of practicing them. So getting there is an iterative process really toward empowerment that starts with finding shared meanings and defining shared commitments that tie all the drumming and life skills to our work as a community and as community members, but also as individuals. And then tying that to the goals students have for themselves, and beyond that, the goals that students have for life. So we really start with two questions every year when we start a program. Who do you want to be? And that doesn't mean what kind of career do you want for yourself? What do you want to be, a doctor or a teacher or whatever, but rather what kind of person do you want to be? And then what are the steps that you're taking to get there? So I think that this approach achieves engaged students who feel empowered in the class context because they can see and feel how they benefit from it and how they benefit from everything that happens in the class. And everything in the class is in fact built around making sure that students are the active participants in everything that we do. So in thinking about the second question, how do we know, or how do I know when the work has made a difference? Really, I define success based on what students are able to do and what they believe they can do. So that really is the definition of self-efficacy, beliefs in one's ability, and those beliefs specifically tied to tasks and in a particular context. And for us, the context is a drum class. I'm not looking for compliance or social control, and what I'm really most looking for is vitality. So, a lot of times, for example, I've done work in professional development. You go into classrooms and people think, well, your classroom is well ordered because everybody's quiet and silent, and focused maybe, but silence or just being quiet can be an issue of compliance. Whereas we're looking for vitality, students to be excited, feeling powerful and using their power for good and in good ways, and expressing that and in both obvious and more subtle ways. Are they helping one another? Are they kind to one another? Are they empathetic toward one another? These are signs of success as I see it. Are they expressing their own ideas and running the class? Or does it seem like the teacher is in charge of everything? Obviously, when I start at the beginning of the year, it looks like I'm running things, but by the end, it should look like the students are running things, and they should be. Drum Power started often as intervention in Madison. When I got here, I often would get, a group of students who had the highest referrals in a school, for example, and folks would challenge me to just do something positive with the students. And ultimately, they usually had produced a good result and had a good time together and found some community. But I started to push schools here in Madison, especially, to make drum power available to the full community. One, because it provides a level playing field in ways that students don't often see. They know who does well in math and reading and writing and social studies, and they know who struggles in those same areas. And often those students are not in classes together. So I felt like with drum power, when you bring in something new, you can allow all those students to be together, and you'll figure out that some of the ones who struggle in some of those other places will have strengths in these places. And it's a nice place to just provide a new experience for interacting. For the students who are very focused and tend to do very well at that, it still can be an opportunity for them to learn, and I've used it as such, to lead in a gentle and kind and empathetic way, so that some of that work can start to be done, especially if you have a mixed group of students. Another way to measure sort of the successes is to look at what students do and sort of what the examples are that they share. I like to share one story of a student, for example, at Lowell Elementary School, where we used to perform as part of the Read Your Heart Out activity every year, which is where they bring in African American parents, come and actually get to read to their classrooms of their students. And I've done it many times, and it's a very special event. But the drummers would actually perform as part of the lunch activity and the celebratory lunch that was given to the readers as a thank you. And so one year I wasn't able to be there, and so the drummers performed and presented without me, as they often did, again, as youth empowerment. And through some mix-up, about 4 or 5 students, including the one student who came to me and told me the story, they put away all the drums for all the other students. There was about 40 or so drums that day, so it was like a huge amount of kids. So they did a lot of work. And this one student was pretty angry and upset because she came to me and said, we put all these drums away, and that's not the community or the example of community that we practice in drum power. And I'm upset because I don't feel like we should have had to do all this by ourselves. And her coming to me so upset, saying this isn't the community that we live, was, took all my restraint not to just hug her and be happy, but actually, show some dismay and match her upsetness in the inequity of it. And it obviously was unequal, but I was really happy that she was owning those concepts and recognizing when that wasn't present. So that's another example of sort of how we measure successes. As a researcher, I conducted a study to try to figure out and measure some of these successes. And basically, I created a survey instrument that would assess drumming skill development and social emotional learning skill development over time. And we did that in discipline, in community, and leadership. And I broke those down into constructs consistent with self-efficacy as laid out by Albert Bandura. And then did the same for drumming skill. So for drumming skill, that would have been asking questions like, can you name all the rhythms that we've played over the course of the year? Could you demonstrate tone, bass, and slap on the djembe? Could you teach 1 or 2 of the rhythms to someone else? That sort of thing. And then we measured it over a couple of different time points. But to figure out if the quantitative data really had weight, we used a qualitative instrument where we used a grounded theory, constructivist grounded theory analysis, where we gave a series of interview questions by an impartial research assistant that I trained, and then we looked for patterns in that data to show a confluence of themes, and we sort of sifted that several times until we narrowed down to a few themes. So I'll share with you quickly what the conclusions were of that. Basically, what we found was that there were 4 main themes that sort of rose to the top. There was this idea of feeling personally connected, which was essentially connecting to drumming, friends, a sense of personal history and interest and fun. A second theme was my teacher as a trusted guide and caregiver, which was a reflection on my role as the instructor and sort of the way students viewed that. And then there was also a third theme. The third theme was practicing the pillars, this idea that we had created a special space in which to practice social emotional learning. And in our case, that meant practicing leadership, community, and discipline in conjunction with the drumming skills. And then finally, finding my own power, which was essentially just feeling like students were actualized and that they were finding some sort of feelings of agency in the drum class. And students shared, I'll just give a few examples of what sort of students said about that in their own words in terms of those interviews. So in terms of feeling personally connected, one student shared that I have a good time, I learn new things, and just be in my own little world. And my own little world is music and stuff. She came from a musical family. Another student shared in terms of the idea of my teacher as a trusted guide and caregiver. He said, when I joined the drum group, I felt pretty nervous. It was a new thing and there were a lot of people in there. Mr. Lashley has an interesting teaching style. Interesting. He's a great teacher, but very different than more traditional teachers. He's very focused on discipline and he pushes people. He doesn't let people stay down. He constantly pushes for them to be able to go farther, and he makes them think that they can go farther. He tells people that they can, and he helps them to do that. And then finally, around finding my power, one student shared, I learned that I can do something even though it's hard. I learned kind of to be yourself. I used to think I needed to be more cool to fit in with my older brother, and Mr. Lashley just taught me to just try your best, but do it your own way. And then finally, on that same idea of finding my power, another student shared, I learned that I should not doubt myself. The most important thing I learned is probably that you should not give up and to just keep trying. If you're doing drumming and you get something wrong and you just say, oh, I can't do that, then you're never going to learn it. This girl, Samia, does the breaks, which means she leads the drummers with her drum, playing instructions with the drum. And she's really good at it. But sometimes she messes up, but she keeps trying, and she doesn't just say, oh, I can't do this. But she keeps going. And I learned from watching her that I should do that. So, in closing, in terms of outcomes, obviously as teachers, it's often the case that you don't get to see, and you never know if students are actually getting the outcomes out of the time with you that you hope that they are. So it was reassuring to see that students felt like the direction that they were going was giving them something that they valued. And one of the reasons, I'll share and stop at this, that one of the reasons that I got the doctoral training in educational psychology was to share some methodology with teachers in the field, and hopefully contribute some ways of assessing some of this stuff so that everybody doesn't have to get a PhD to be able to do this. All right, so I'll stop there and for now.
Hi, I'm Dr. Haley Love. I'd like to first thank Place for creating this space to have these important conversations. When I think about centering the whole child, my first inclination is to go back to my undergrad and master's programs, which were both in child development. So I think about centering the whole child as really focusing on all areas of development, not just kind of select areas of what may be considered academic development. And also thinking about the way different areas of development intersect. So both of my degrees in child development were heavily influenced by Bronfenbrenner, and he's often reduced to kind of those cyclical ecological circles. But really, his theory was really innovative in thinking about the child and their development as being centered around reciprocal and bidirectional processes. And so as the child is being influenced by their environment, the environment is also being influenced by the child. And so I think about centering the whole child as really being interactive and considering all areas of the ways that development intersects. And then also that you can't take the child away from their environment, especially away from their family, and that a part of centering the whole child is centering the child within the environments they're developing in and the child within their family in particular. As my work has developed and I focused on children with disability labels, I think about being responsive to the child's abilities and support needs, as well as other aspects of their identities. In special education, we understandably focus a lot on disability, but that does not take away or remove the impact of the child's other identities, such as race, ethnicity, family or home language, socioeconomic status, gender, etc. And so I think about centering the whole child, particularly with children with disabilities, as making sure that we have to consider all areas of a child's identities and the ways that influences their development, especially since other aspects of a child's identities, other than whether or not they have a disability label, what label they have, influences, whether they're placed in a general education or special education setting, whether they're even labeled with a disability in the first place, whether they are suspended or expelled, which removes them from learning opportunities. So being responsive to the whole child and centering the whole child when we're talking about children with disabilities cannot erase or remove them from other aspects of their identities. For me, what that looks like, I think first back to in my master's when I was doing a fellowship, and I started working with an Eritrean community center, and I went in and I was kind of supposed to be helping them develop and determine inclusive practices for children in their community with disabilities. And as I got started, though, I was helping read and respond to letters from immigration lawyers. I was helping them with their adult English language program. And really, all of that was still supporting the child by helping the adults in their lives, by considering their environment as a whole, their cultural strengths, and the values that their culture holds. And so, even in my current research, I look a lot at family engagement and family professional partnerships because I view that as still a way of centering the child within their family, of getting to know families and what families view as important. So, for example, there's research evidence that first, there's not a lot of diversity within children's books, although that's increasing. But children of color are still more likely to read a book with an anthropomorphized animal than they are with someone who looks like them. And there's also little representation of disabilities. When we talk with families, particularly Black families, they talk about the importance of their child understanding race and racism. And so by using practices that focus on, traditional class or academic readiness, for example, and not attending to supporting the child's developing identities and acknowledging differences like racial differences as positive and cultural differences positive, not only are we not supporting the child holistically, but we're also not attending to what families view as being important for their children's development. And so I think that understanding family perspectives is also important as a way of understanding how to support supporting the whole child. When I'm thinking about teacher preparation, which is also a specific area of my research, but something that I do as a part of my work, I think about really instilling in teachers the importance of listening to people with disabilities or people who identify as disabled and prefer identity first language. So for example, when I was teaching RPSC 300 in the fall, which is our kind of intro to disability and special education course, something that I added was I matched kind of readings within their textbook with blog posts and articles from people with disabilities and documentaries that highlighted their perspectives, such as Script Camp, which is available for free online and on Netflix, which really illustrates how people with disabilities led the fight for disability rights. When they read their textbook chapter on intellectual disabilities, we watched the documentary Intelligent Lives, when they read the chapter on autism. We read a blog post from someone who identifies as autistic and non-binary about the ways that autism research can often not listen to people with autism, and the implications that has for whether or not it's able to really support people with autism and highlight and understand their perspectives and strengths. And so recognize the whole child for me also means learning to listen to the child and to people with disabilities as a way of informing our work and pushing back against deficit perspectives. I kind of view success as, especially when I'm working with pre-service teachers, I view success as them learning to view inclusive education as a process of critical praxis that is critical reflection and action that's centered around trying to increase inclusion, addressing issues of injustice. And so, for example, when I was teaching RPSC 300, a student came to me because we had read the blog post that discussed the harms that applied behavior analysis has done to people with autism, written by a person with autism. And so she came to me concerned because she had a job as an ABA line therapist. And of course, I'm not telling her to like quit her job or saying that all ABA is bad, but I am saying that we need to listen to people with autism and people who are subject to ABA in order to center their perspectives and understand how to better support them and advocate with and for them. And so with that student, I was able to have a really nuanced conversation about how do we apply disability justice principles to the work that she's doing? So that child was receiving ABA therapy for 20 plus hours a week, and their families was being told to use those principles and practices, and their teachers were using those principles and practices. And so, when we think about disability justice principles like sustainability, how can she, within her locus of control, try to enact that in the ways that she works with this child so that they're able to get opportunities for rest and to just be and explore their own strengths and interests and to develop as a person, not just developing as someone who adults are constantly trying to intervene on. And so to me, that success is, that pre-service teacher who's working as an ABA therapist, really thinking critically about this child's experience and perspectives and what it means to kind of go even beyond a strengths-based approach to center that child's holistic well-being and identities. And so some of the outcomes that really drive my work is trying to support inclusive education from a justice-driven perspective and from a perspective that's really centering the perspectives of multiply marginalized children and families, children of color with disabilities and their families. So for me, that means trying to expand the literature and philosophies that are being used in special education and early childhood special education, early childhood in general and education in general, to really be thinking about how can we listen to people with disabilities and multiply marginalized children and families. How can we consider children holistically, meaning all developmental areas, all aspects of their identities and backgrounds, and really be driven by principles of justice, like disability justice and justice-driven inclusive education, and rather than just centering or kind of reproducing the same practices that can marginalize children and families. So again, thank you to Place for creating this space to have these important conversations, and to my fellow panelists for the amazing work that they're doing and the great conversation that we had.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haley Love. I really appreciated you orienting us to disability justice principles, and also some language that was new for me that I really value, but characterizing children as experiencing multiple marginalizations. I really appreciated that people first language and the notion that the children are being marginalized, and then the burden that puts on families to repair children or repair harm that they've experienced as a result of those. And I also really appreciated you opening with the notion of the whole child being embedded in environments and multiple environments. So thank you so much for your insight. We're gonna move to elementary school, and we're really filled with joy to have Iris Patterson with us, who's a local elementary school teacher for many years. We actually have a short video to share that is gonna provide a little context on Iris Patterson's work and perspectives.
Okay, so does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Silence. A new sound in education. Virtual education has created a new reality for both teachers and students.
Anyone?
If educators are having a hard time connecting when it comes to distance learning, it's not only because they just can't see or hear their students.
We can sit here all day.
This new reality has changed so much about the way teachers teach and the way students learn. From student apathy to technology issues to inequity in digital access, teachers have had to and are still learning to drastically change the way they do their job. So how can we move from surviving virtual learning environments to thriving in them? You can try to interact with your students to build those teacher-student relationships, but how do you foster student-to-student connections? Fifth grade teacher Iris Patterson uses an interesting model to help develop those connections.
There's this show called Kid Nation. It was a TV show where they put 40 kids in an abandoned city for 40 days to see if they could create a better society than adults without having them interfere.
Previously on Kid Nation, 40 young pioneers set out to build a world of their own in an old ghost town called Bonanza City.
As bizarre as this early reality show might seem, Iris has seen aspects of the show, particularly community building, that have proven to be useful for her when it comes to student engagement.
So within the show, they create districts, so 4 red, green, yellow, and blue, and at the end of every week, they have a showdown. So the kids work, and then they have a showdown, and we modeled our classroom after that, and I've been doing this. This is about my 4th or 5th time doing this. It's my first time doing it virtually, but then each district forms a little family. And I know I'm talking a lot about this because it's so important, because I myself don't have the resources to reach every student through Zoom the way that I can even in school. What is happening is they're forming little families. So when I give an assignment, and at the beginning of the year before the districts, I'd have 20 some kids, here's your assignment. Now I give it and they select the district leaders, and each family works on the assignment together.
In this Kid Nation model, students hold each other accountable for the work and learning being done.
So they're checking on each other, and that's really important. If they're not there, they're emailing, hey, where are you, Connor? We're missing you today. We really need your help. Hey, so they're building that community, and that's more important than the academics right now. It's them feeling like they're still connected, they're still important. People care, the way that they're helping each other, and all those things you could dream of as a teacher. It's like having 4 teachers in my classroom, the district leaders, that are helping to get the other kids all up to the same levels. I mean, they are making this like spreadsheets that have like which of their district members have this turned in and that turned in, and oh, you still need 30 minutes for your reading log. And it is literally like, I don't think I could hire 4 teachers, adult teachers, to do what I'm seeing that their own peers are doing for each other. I mean, it's a kid nation. It really is.
Giving students some agency over their education can help open a line of communication between you and them, and more communication can lead to growth for both of you.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Yarel and Haley, love everything that you guys brought out to begin with. I was taking some notes. Hey, MMSD fam, super happy to be here with you all and all other teachers as well. I'm going to be very high energy because I'm so excited about this model. It's been just transformed entirely the way that teaching has gone. A couple notes that I took that I wanted to reflect on that Haley and Yarel said is, the question is, how can you be responsive to meet the whole child's needs through multiple marginalizations? How do you prioritize their voices, especially of the disabled? And just how do you capture the voices and perspectives of the children's? You can't. That is where we're going wrong. You as one person with 20, 25, sometimes 30 kids in your classroom, you can't do that. And I think that is, for me, when we talk about centering the child, we've got to decenter ourselves, okay? So when I'm thinking about how I'm explaining Kid Nation, it's really about you taking the back seat. And for some of you, that might sound, well, offensive, like, I'm the teacher, I don't need to take the back seat, but we do. We've got to put the kids in charge. They've got to be the ones that are driving the curriculum and driving everything. And that's where you're going to get your engagement from. So working with this model of Kid Nation, I'm hoping that you walk away today and that you have an opportunity to ask questions, and that you could start something immediate in your classroom. I've definitely talked to, now that this has been kind of put out publicly, a few teachers that have simply read the blog post that I put that link to, watch the video, and their classrooms are being transformed. You don't need to learn a new curriculum. You can always implement what you're doing with this model, which is fantastic because it doesn't go against whatever your district is putting out there for you to teach. You can keep doing that. So it's not taking away or having to learn. It's just kind of how you're putting your classroom together and how you're structuring it is the magic in the Kid Nation model. So basically the thing to start with is that you want to design your curriculum in a way that your kids can teach it. So now when I'm getting the scope and sequence from the district, and we're making our slideshows and everything that we put out, and especially we've learned a lot through Zoom, is that you're making it in a way that you could flip it over to the kids. So you've got your literacy lesson, your social, your science, your different lessons, but you make your slideshows in your presentation so that you ask the kids, do you want to teach this? And you start empowering them to be the leaders. So right now I want to say 20, 80%, it's every day it's dwindling. My voice is heard in the classroom maybe 10% of the day and 90%. Anything that I'm doing that I can push to the kids, they do it. You have your morning meeting routine. Once you get your routine set and they kind of know how to do it, hey, who wants to lead it? I don't even know the last time that I've led a morning meeting. I pretty much mute myself and I'm kind of doing some other things while they're reading the affirmation, they're doing the greeting activities, they're doing everything. So that's kind of the number one thing, is really trying to figure out how could I make the slideshow or whatever I'm doing easy enough for me, I'm working with 9, 10, and 11-year-olds, that they can click on the slideshow or share their own screen and take it away, right? So that's the first thing. There is a really important concept though to starting, like, well, how do you get the kids to listen to each other and work together and respect and not be spamming the chat, right? So that philosophy starts with Ubuntu. So if you've ever heard of the African philosophy Ubuntu, I am because we are, that's really taking humanity at the center and teaching kids that I can't be happy if you're not happy. And the kids love it. And we had a guest speaker, Joel Baraka. He's available. He's at UW-Madison. If you really listen to this and you want to, you can contact me and I can give you his email information, but he will come to your classroom and do a whole presentation about Ubuntu, because he came from South Africa. He came from quite a few different countries, but he went to a school that was one of the first schools that had Ubuntu philosophy. And so what the kids are learning is that, if I'm doing all right in my classroom and I'm passing this test or that, or I get the assignment, is that good enough? Is that why we're here, for me to shine out? No. So the kids are learning that I can take my skills as a leader and I can help every single kid in my classroom. And the kids have complete 100% taken that on. You will hear Ubuntu in our classroom so many times a day. Every time we go to a breakout room, it's Ubuntu, Ubuntu. They say it to each other. They say it to me. We had a new student come last week, and they came and it was so awesome. We were going through our routines. They were telling about it. And someone said, we didn't tell him about Ubuntu, and they were able to express the entire philosophy to him in a minute, right? So that he could get it, and saying, that I'm accountable for you. If you need help, ask us, because we're not going to be happy if you're not happy. So we're here to help you. And it was just so beautiful to see them embody that Ubuntu philosophy and how quickly they can incorporate it. And they just inherently understand it. It's not something you really have to even teach and have a bunch of lessons. It's like who those kids are. It's who all of us are. It's our humanity. It's that taking away that Western white philosophy of you being the leader and trying to, mandate how things go, and really looking at our collective and saying we all matter equally. And so they love it. They take it on. And then, like I mentioned in the video, through the Kid Nation model, you just divide the kids into 4. They pick their own district leaders, because where this started was actually, I'm really glad that Haley went right before I did. I had always, when I started, been well, I shouldn't say always, but the majority of my teaching my first 8 years had been, I'd had special ed support. I had a special ed teacher I worked with. I had SEAs that were wonderful that I worked with, and I had more ability to work in small groups or have a teacher. And then I switched to a classroom where I had no special ed support. And so that was a new kind of a thing for me, where I would have the same, an assignment, and I was used to being able to have another adult or 2 or 3 in the classroom, and that was gone. And I thought, that still needs to happen. And as I looked around my classroom and I looked at the brilliance that was there, I said, you know what? These kids can do it. And at that same time, I had started, my brother showed me the Kid Nation TV show, and I said, that's how we're going to do it. And sure enough, I was right. Those kids immediately, they selected their district leaders and they became the teachers. So when I give an assignment, most kids need, or a lot of kids, that second dose of what are we doing? What's the instructions, right? And that's what the teacher typically provides, right? A structure and another framework. But that is a role that the kids can do. And you know what? They can do it better than you. I'm here to tell you that the more that I do this model, the kids are better teachers than you are. And you just have to accept that because they can relate to each other. They know what it feels like to be a kid that same age. They know, they have different language they use. At one time, one of the students was saying, yeah, you guys are awesome teachers, but you kind of got oldies, they're oldies but goldies methods, like they really own that part, that they understand each other and they're there to help each other. And so it's fantastic. I was not offended in the least when that student said that. And so another part of this model, I think, is that something that we miss is the educational risks that can be taken when you have a format like Kid Nation. When you divide them into those 4 districts, they have their own space. In the classroom, it would be like a table, right? 4 different tables in the classroom that they own as their own. In virtual world, it's breakout rooms. So each of the districts has their own space every day that they go to multiple times in breakout rooms. And it really becomes their families. The kids said, yeah, it feels like we're sitting around the dinner table, and that's what you want. It becomes their school family. So for kids that have, maybe they don't go home to a well-structured family, right? They have a school family that they're at that day, and that can be an addition. It doesn't need to take the place of their family, but for some, that's really their rock when they come to school, and they really consider that their family. And then they can take risks, and we ask them to solve problems in front that they're not sure about or speak up, right? When they go to their small districts, they trust each other and they've developed a relationship throughout the year, and they do take those educational risks. And you see the leaders prompting them and prodding them, and you can do it. And instead of having, your lesson where you're asking 2 or 3 kids, and then how do you know what the rest of the kids are learning? Right? Okay, your regular 3 or 4 will answer. You don't have that much time. When you break them out and you ask that same question, I was able to listen to 4 different rooms at the same time and be able to hear so many more discussions and so much more, like I said, risk taking, and kids who typically would never answer in the large group starting to open up. So for me, that's what centering the child is. The whole child is giving them the space, the stage, everything, again, that you can do as a teacher, that you can give to kids, you should give to kids as that responsibility. So that also means making kids, when you center them, feel part of not just this community in their classroom. That's just one aspect too of kind of the Kid Nation model, is that you want to bring in, you become kind of a networker for your kids. And when you're not spending so much time being the focus of the classroom, you have a little bit more time to think about, well, who can I bring in? How can I make these kids feel part of the whole world? So bringing in international speakers is easier than ever. We Zoomed with someone from Kenya, right? Like, boom, a couple emails and they're on your Zoom. And we had Anaya Butler, who was a 13 or 14-year-old protester leading thousands, 30 to 40,000 protests, come and talk about intersectionality between environmental justice and racism. And they got a chance to dialogue with her. And oh my gosh, my students, I think some of them have their career goals now is to be, social justice activists. And so these things that you can do to make them feel part of their community and the larger community, that is centering the child. It's making them see that they are the center of the world, and that we need them to grow and develop their leadership skills to run this world. And when you do something like a Kid Nation model, they live that every day and they see the importance of that. So the next question that they kind of wanted us to focus on is, what goals and priorities inform action? So right now, the goals that I have in my classroom is that they really get they really direct their schedule. And MMSD did something so fantastic that I'm so proud of them is that they gave us office hours in the afternoon. So typically, I think one of the reasons why we don't give kids control is because we are stuck on those schedules, right? After 15 years of being stuck, you don't have time, right? You want to hear what kids have to say. You want to carry on the discussion, but that hour's up and now you got to switch to science. You got to, we are so stuck to the schedule. And to me, that is a racist, that's a white supremacist way of thinking, not giving like giving the chance for them to direct. So, so for me, it's really making sure that they, like I was saying with these office hours, they now can kind of flip and take the literacy time and they decide, no, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to talk about this. This matters to us. We're going to give more time to this. And they were able to push that literacy, what we needed to get done, to the afternoon. And so anything that we do, they're directing the schedule. And for the first time in my career, I've really seen through the Kid Nation model that they're the ones that can make those choices, and they make the best choices. So they are the ones that are leading and extending and bringing up new topics that weren't in the lesson plans to begin with, but probably should have been. But because the kids are directing it and they're the ones that are bringing in the information, that is co-creating with the kids. That is where the future of education needs to lead, is letting our students, right, push us forward. So I know that there's a ton more I could say right now, but I'm sure I've used up my slot time, and I believe we'll have a question and answer session. But I am here and I'm so excited to, if any of you out there want to learn more about it or want to try this, it's fantastic. And you can literally transform your classroom overnight, honestly. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I mean, we're so glad you're here. I'm so honored to live in a city where you're an elementary school teacher. Thank goodness for your energy. And I'm so excited to hear that you're working on a publication to make permanent the Kid Nation model framework. I love it. And I love the notion of whenever possible, giving children the mantle of expertise, and whenever possible, letting them do the bulk of the intellectual, creative leadership work in and beyond classrooms. So thank you again.
Yeah, and before I forget, just real quick, I know, as I do want to say what it also leads to, I had one day where the kids planned the entire day. And I think this is powerful because it's another thing you could take, is that I turned off my camera, the kids planned, and it was their idea for me to just be Siri, which was Iris backwards. I did attendance and some technical things, but I have 4.5 hours of a day that the kids planned every single thing. And it was academic, it was focused, and I did not, they led themselves. They taught for the entire day, and they called it the No Teacher Challenge, and they loved it. And it really allowed them to feel what it was like to be the teacher and responsible for the class and the learning. And so that's just one more thing I would challenge any of you guys to do, is to flip that classroom, because if 9, 10, and 11-year-olds, can do it, anybody can do it. So sorry, I know that my time is up, but I will now mute.
No need to apologize. It's a gift, right? And even this notion of time being white in schools, I mean, that's my paraphrasing, but a question that Lynn asked that I want to come back to after we hear from Roberto is, what do we see as the biggest challenges teachers and schools face in centering the whole child? And one of the answers I sort of heard you say, Iris, is time, and how time is structured. And I want to come back to Lynn's question and some other questions, and thank y'all for putting questions in the chat. That's another kind of gift. But we want to pivot to hear a little bit from Roberto Rivera, who's joining us from Montreal. How are you?
I'm doing well. Can y'all hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you see me?
I cannot see you.
Gotta love technology, right? What about now? Okay, excelente. All right, thank you so much for having me. It's just a blessing to be here and share space with so many brilliant minds. Dr. Urel, Dr. Love, Iris, man, that was so incredible. Thank you. That model is just beautiful. I think Dr. Love used the term praxis, and I think that's very fitting for what we've been hearing so far in terms of all these theoretical models and action and the whole piece of the interplay between those two. And so I guess that's a good place for me to jump in with the first question of how does centering the whole child, what does that really mean in my work? And I guess I'm thinking a lot about Paulo Freire And Paulo Freire, he talks about the purpose of education is to become fully human. He talks about how the act of oppression is actually dehumanizing both to the oppressor and to the oppressed. And he says that, if the oppressed start engaging in critical dialogue, if they start reading the word and reading the world, as Dr. Love was saying, if they can see their intersectionality in the text of the books and also in the text of their social fabric of their lives, if they can take social action and engage in reflection, that the oppressed can regain their humanity, they can become healed and whole. But he also says that the oppressor cannot regain their humanity without the help of the oppressed. And so, I think Paulo Freire is really, laying the groundwork for this whole child sort of dialogue and engagement. I think a good way to kind of start thinking about taking steps is, realizing that we are multi-dimensional beings. Our students are multi-dimensional beings. We got a mind, we got a body, we got a heart, we got a spirit. And any space that we go into that doesn't acknowledge all these different dimensions of the self is potentially dehumanizing. I think it's important to recognize that there are systems and institutions that are not seeing the whole person, that are not helping individuals and their communities to meet their needs. And so oppression is very real. But I think the goal is to become whole. The goal is to become healed, to engage in self-actualization, to engage in community actualization, as Iris so beautifully articulated, talking about this notion of Ubuntu, right? And so for us, a lot of inspiration not only comes from Frade, but also from the Blackfoot Nation model. More people are familiar with Abraham Maslow's pyramid and the whole hierarchy of needs, but what a lot of folks don't realize is that he actually stole that model from the Blackfoot Indians. So in the late 30s, he went to Alberta, Canada, and he was interested in how people could survive and thrive in the midst of genocide, coming from Jewish ancestry himself. And so he started, trying to learn from the Blackfoot Indians. And so he took this model, but coming from this individualistic cultural perspective, he said, okay, well, if we can get our basic needs met and get a sense of belonging, and maybe one day down the line, we can become self-actualized. But he got the model wrong. And according to the Blackfoot Nation model, which is a teepee, not a pyramid, they're coming from a collectivist cultural perspective. And the very first phase in the Blackfoot Nation model is self-actualization, meaning if you are part of this community, we are going to acknowledge all that you are. You're going to have all of your basic needs met. And that this is just the first phase. We're going to get to that real quick because there's another phase. And that other phase is community actualization, right? Not just you finding your own purpose and voice, but us as a collective using our voices almost like a choir moving in the same direction. And then the top of the teepee and the Blackfoot Nation model is around cultural perpetuity or cultural sustainability, where the members are so empowered, so grounded in their cultural ways of being, their knowledge, their identity, that they can continue to iterate and remix their culture and facing the contemporary present issues going on today. And so, we do this work with staff, creating this beloved community, helping to cultivate a sense of multicultural competence, of the staff engaging with one another holistically, engaging with their students and the community holistically. And maybe I could kind of explain how we do that more in the Q&A, but getting back to the question, how have we done this historically? We have this idea that one of the best examples in our contemporary history of young people being oppressed and engaging in critical creative dialogue, of reading the word and reading the world and engaging in social action and reflection. One of the best case studies on earth is the case study of hip hop culture, not to be confused with hip hop industry. That's a whole nother workshop. So what we've done is we've created a curriculum that we frame as a culturally sustaining social and emotional learning curriculum, teaching leadership and relationship and citizenship skills to young folks we help young folks to start engaging in critical media literacy and really understanding, okay, what are these different images that are coming at them? How are they trying to frame them in their communities? Is this a deficit framing? Is it an asset-based framing? Getting young folks also to get grounded in their identity, to find that spark of passion, that self-actualization, and to start really reclaiming their story, sharing their blues, sharing about the things that hurt them, and getting to a place where they can, have this near tragic, near comic lyricism where they could potentially laugh at the things that have been set up for their demise. And then a big part of our whole process with the youth is that they engage in a critical service learning project. So they identify an issue in the school community that they want to address. And then they take all the assets and capital that they've uncovered and they start to address these issues. And it may be that there's a master narrative that frames them and their communities in a negative light. But whatever they choose to do, this is all student led. And I just want to underscore that point that Iris shared earlier, that, if we want to center this whole child ideology, we have to center students. And really, I wrote this piece down that, the best teachers are students of our students, and the best students are teachers of other students, right? And so really engaging young folks, letting their voices be heard. So our young people have published books with poetry and visual art and photography, organizing stuff. This is across 7 different cities that youth are in this Youth Voice Nation book. They've created apps. They've done albums. There's a Youth Voice Nation radio app that 24/7 has poetry and music that's all created by youth. They've done block parties. They've created their own institutions. If you check out the Firehouse Community Arts Center in Chicago, is a space that was co-created with youth. Or if you check out the Wilmington Empowerment Project in LA, that was co-created with youth. And so for us, as far as outcomes are concerned, we've seen attendance go from 55% to 96% in 1 month in some of the most underfunded, chronically disengaged high schools in Chicago. We've seen GPAs go up a full point cumulatively in as little as 10 weeks. We've seen youth who've been kicked out of, multiple schools going to a very alternative school. The teachers got trained in this ideology, and that school had its first ever 100% graduation rate. We've been publishing, talking about the intersection of social justice, youth development, and social and emotional learning. If you want to reach out through the chat, I can share some of these links. We've seen hope go up, social political consciousness go up. We've seen identity increase, cultural, racial, ethnic identity in our youth. But I'm gonna be really honest and transparent with y'all. And that is, when we look at a lot of this work over the course of a longitudinal sort of perspective, oftentimes what happens is there's this 5-year mark. And many of the students by that time have matriculated to college or career or to something they're doing in the community. And what happens is a lot of the staff, a lot of the administrators, they use this data and they go get better paying jobs. And what we see is that this effort starts to wane, usually after 5 years. And so I was very blessed in the last year to begin this sort of global scan. It was a year of discovery when we started this Pain to Propane project. And I was asking the question of, what school communities exist where oppressed and youth who've been dehumanized are experiencing healing and growth, and that they're thriving, and this is being done in a sustained way. And so we went through all the literature in SEL, trauma-informed care, reaching out to different leaders and scholars, Dr. Sean Jenwright, Dr. Jeff Duncan Andrade, and many others. And we found 3 sites around the world that are exemplary in engaging the whole child and doing this in a sustained way. So one is Kiaroa College in Auckland, New Zealand. Another one is NACA, Native American Community Academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then the third one was Kia Kanu'oakaina in Hawaii. And so as we started shooting films, the goal was to do a Netflix documentary series. And what I'm going to do right now is just include a link, because we were able to at least get one of these completed before the Rona hit. So you can check out that link. That's a short documentary film about NACA down in Albuquerque. But we started doing this digital ethnography and really learning deeply from these communities. And what began to emerge is what we have coined the critical well-being framework. And so really there's common practices across these sites, common practices that are rooted in Indigenous education, that are rooted and really poised to serve First Nation youth. These are really ideas that sort of decenter whiteness and the white gaze, if you will. But three tenets. One of them is that they all have this impetus of really getting youth and community voice, co-creating the space, right? So the community was part of defining the mission and the vision of the school, of even formulating the job descriptions of folks who are getting hired. And they said, you know what, we don't just want numeracy, we don't just want proficiency in literacy, we want our youth to have a strong cultural identity. We want our youth to be able to be fluent in their native language. In Kiowa College in particular, the Maori population, they were at a place where their language was on the verge of extinction. And so that was a huge piece, was to preserve and to sustain that language. They also had this amazing goal that they wanted all the youth to become what they called warrior scholars, where they would be able to be these advocates and these change agents for their community. So having that youth and community voice influencing policy and curriculum and pedagogy and measurement instruments is absolutely huge. The second tenet was looking at the importance of well-being. Like in NACA, you'll see in the film that well-being is a very important focus of the mission of the school. And so they check in with the staff, they're checking in with the students, they're checking in with the community. And what they've done so beautifully down there is that it's really too much for one school to try to nurture the well-being of everyone. But it puts them in a posture where they have to connect with various community-based organizations and creating a web, creating this ecosystem, if you will, that can nurture individual and collective well-being. And then the third tenet is really on this notion of trauma and really expanding this idea that it's not just ACEs, right? That we have to understand that historical and intergenerational trauma is impacting folks, that racism is impacting folks every single day. And not just acknowledging that the trauma and this pain is coming in, but also nurturing this strong, loving pedagogy. In Hawaii, they call it the pedagogy of Aloha, where the relationship and this notion of radical love is not just at the periphery, it's not just at the beginning of the school year or the beginning of class, but every single lesson is, the community's holding the teachers accountable to this notion and question of, are our students loving themselves? Are they loving their peers more? Are they loving their community more with every single lesson that is being taught? And so for us right now, we have built an alliance of different educators and scholars and activists globally. And we're working nationally to help one state, one city, and one community to also create this kind of thriving educational ecosystem. And so we're doing some deep work in Wisconsin. I think I'm kind of running out of time here, but what I'll say about the piece in Wisconsin is that, we're starting a youth voice campaign where we're asking young folks who have experienced post-traumatic growth in the last year. As we all know, everything happening with COVID, the disproportionate impact of the virus to communities of color, but still many young people are thriving and healing and growing in this season. And so we're creating a youth-led movement where more youth can share these stories and equipping these young folks to become action researchers, to identify the community cultural wealth that allows these youth to experience post-traumatic growth. So we're going to be shooting films. We're going to be doing a huge campaign. If you want to learn more about that, please reach out. Again, it's been an honor And I look forward to the continued dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for orienting us to those tenets and the documentary. We really appreciate that and look forward to checking that out. You know, one of our central questions today was something along the lines of like, how do we know what we've done has landed? How do we know it works? And I just really value the questions you offered us toward the end, Roberto, about are our children loving themselves, loving their peers, and loving their communities. And wow, wouldn't that be I mean, I don't want to advocate for a rubric necessarily, but isn't that a beautiful sort of framework for thinking about our collective success in this space? We're going to pivot toward a Q&A portion. We have about 15 minutes together to really lift up some of the chat questions. And I wanted to go back to Lynn's question. And maybe Roberto, while you're on, I'll have you start with it. It's the same one I articulated earlier, and I'll also put it in the chat. But what do we see as some of the big challenges for teachers, for schools, for systems in centering the whole child? Like, what do we see as getting in the way?
Yeah, it's a really great question. You know, I would sort of look at that question through the lens of culturally sustaining pedagogy. And, you know, one of the questions that those culturally sustaining pedagogues ask is, you know, be culturally relevant for what, right? And, you know, we can try to be culturally relevant and so forth and so on, but are we just trying to help young people to do better on standardized tests, right? And the other piece that they ask is, you know, what does it look like to define success that's not dictated by the white gaze? And I think that's a really important piece. And if we really get to it, I think, you know, what we measure really matters. It really it dictates. It's a thermostat to the culture and the climate of our systems and our institutions. And I think especially right now, we have this crazy reality that's happening in the US where there's, you know, youth who are homeless or, you know, who have parents who are unemployed and, you know, folks are dying. And yet you still have these systems that are ascribing to these old notions of success that are still pushing these standardized tests on these youth. And I think it's really, we're at a critical juncture. And this is really a moral moment where we have to realize if we're not taking care of the well-being of our students and their families and their communities, like what the heck are we doing? And I think, you know, conversely, there's an opportunity to begin to redefine what constitutes success. I think there's an opportunity to redirect the purpose of education. I think about Stephen Jay Gould. He says, you know, what good is intelligence if not the ability to solve longstanding problems creatively? And what Iris is talking about, this model of empowering youth, you know, this is the key to us moving forward. We saw not too long ago all these folks invading the Capitol, this whole insurrection, and I think it proved, if anything, that this democracy is very feeble, and it's not always a guaranteed thing. But we need to have folks who are engaging in citizenship and civic engagement, who are solving real world problems. And I think an important step in that direction is getting youth and community to help co-create what means success, what constitutes success. And, you know, I think we'll be blown away by the results if we could take that road.
I didn't set this norm out the gate, but in the Q&A portion, we want to welcome panelists to jump in. I'm happy to call on folks, but please feel free to hop in around this question of challenges that we see teachers and schools facing in centering the whole child in the ways we would like.
I'll jump in and just say, well, first I got to give big props to my brother from another mother, Roberto, who I'm happy to be here dialoguing with and hearing and feeling your energy and spirit. It's been too long, but I'm glad everybody else gets the benefit of that, as I usually get it more selfishly in a more private way. But
This is an important question. I'm very much in agreement with everybody else on the panel, which is it calls for a reevaluate. To answer it, I think in the best and healthiest way is to really reevaluate what our goals are around learning and what experiences we think young people need to have and what role we think they need to play in determining that. And it's funny, when I started, I feel like a lot of the work for me came because I started off in community-based work, I didn't go through pre-service teacher training. And so my approach was always learning is about life preparation. I never came from a narrower scope of thinking that there was some other thing that you needed to be prepared for, and that all the academic subjects that you learn in school are then in service of preparation for life, not the other way around. And so I think that needs to be a change. I think about, for me, it causes them just to think in terms like arts integration, for example, because that's something that comes up. And I've literally had people come to me and say, arts integration. Is it true that you can teach drumming if you can teach math through drumming? And I say, well, yeah, but why is math, especially as just computational reasoning, as you're thinking about it, the end game? Like, you should be asking, how is math going to help students for life? And then, I would argue to some that actually drumming, in the way I teach it, teaches more than the average math class that will prepare you for life. But there are other ways of thinking about this too. Like, if I define arts integration broadly, then and not just about the arts being involved in other academic subjects, or what we consider academic subjects. I think the arts are academic. The main aspects of them, or the main way of defining them, in my view, is that creativity is present, there's a structure, and then there is freedom. Now, and if you do those things, we can think of these as artistic habits of mind, if you will, and this is an arts integration sort of framework. So if I think about science or mathematics, for example, scientists bring a lot of creativity to the work they do. And they have freedom to even experiment and figure things out and try to apply and figure out novel solutions. So do mathematicians. It's not creative. So why isn't it creative for the students as they learn it? Are students able to bring creativity and freedom when they go to the average high school science class or the average high school math class? So, obviously so I think there's some fundamental understandings that are necessary. Obviously, the issue that came up earlier around just the bureaucracy of limits to time and schedule that Iris talked about, and the reality that some people are stuck in that. And even if they don't want to be stuck, are stuck by the districts that force them to kowtow to those limits, is definitely an issue. And that's before you get to the sort of the barrage of constant new curricula and people feeling like they're overwhelmed and that there's not time and commitment. But I don't think, and Roberto made an excellent point too around the issue of that students aren't centered in the sense that, we're not able to change what kids are being tested on, doesn't match what we're talking about as important in terms of centering the whole child. And there's not support for teachers even as they try to evolve and center children in the work that they do, not in this way, because if you get away from testing and you get away from those focuses, then the support also goes away. And I think Roberto's example of the fact that a lot of times these programs that do a more holistic job are experimental in the sense that they can last for 4 or 5 years, but then aren't really institutionally embedded so that they will continue. Turnover of people is normal. We know that happens. People come, people go. But if you look at the districts around, you can see that the way we organize curriculum and instruction, the way we organize what we've been using as professional development, there's consistency you see, both in budgets and resources and the way they're applied. There's consistency there, but there isn't for the types of programs
that we're advocating for. And finally, it's also true that, we can tell obviously with the impact of Zaretta Hammond's book and the way that sort of took off like wildfire, that there's also some work that needs to be done around just understanding of child and youth development in terms of physiologically and cognitively and even emotionally. Like our pre-service programs haven't necessarily done the best job of preparing folks to do that, especially being able to connect that to culture and the realities of sort of what young people are having to navigate in the world, and facilitating spaces where they can develop that specifically in classrooms. So that's a giant question, but I'll stop at that as the start of an answer.
And I'm gonna jump in there too. So what do you see as the biggest challenges teachers in schools? We've been doing things the same way. Like, why do we have our own classrooms, first of all? Why would you put one teacher with 25, 30 kids? And then why do we keep following that? So I want to bring into the space this idea of teaming really needs to start happening more across the district. So the fully integrated teaching team model is really important. It's really allowing, at least at the elementary school level, it can be really looking at the fact that you don't want to just think about your class. You want to get to know all the kids in that grade level. And that's actually why I loved Lowell. I can't say how much I loved Lowell, but the opportunity for me to be able to join a team where I knew that I could teach all of the kids. I mean, at the end of one year, it's embarrassing to say, but there was a kid, fourth quarter, in another class, and a teacher mentioned their name. I didn't know who that kid was. And they were in the same grade level that I was. And that's really what sparked. I'm like, how could I go a whole year and I don't know the name of this other kid and just down the hall in the classroom? And I was like, that's got to change. This can't keep happening like this. So one thing that needs to change is collaboration. So then, like, now all of the kids, when they come to fifth grade or fourth grade or whatever year I'm teaching, they get every single teacher. When they get that list, sure, they may have me or another teacher, but they know they get all of us to teach them, and we fluidly switch them around, and they get different perspectives. And some kids, are better off with this teaching style from this teacher and that one, and being okay with that. I'm okay that another student might gel with this teacher a little better, but for them to get that exposure of different teaching styles, especially early on, and that fluidity and not having them be so separated. So I think that's a huge challenge we need to overcome. And then we need to look at ourselves as teachers, honestly, and say that we're really the problem, because when it comes down to it, number one, we've got teachers that love being that fountain of knowledge. They want to be the center of attention. You got to check yourself. Am I halfway in this job because I love being there and I love getting this attention and I love that the kids come to me? You got to stop. Honestly, if we're going to really flip it and center the child, you got to back out and know that the kids are coming for each other. You can be there to facilitate, but you got to remove your voice from that classroom. You should really not be speaking the majority of the day. And then you've got to say, why don't I team? We've got to be honest. A lot of times it's because we have control issues. You don't want to give up that control of your classroom. You don't maybe agree necessarily with the teacher down the hallway, but we've got to, as a staff and a community, work together to find ways, or restorative justice when there is problems, and be able to, as colleagues, because that's really what's preventing a lot of this stuff too, is our inability to work with each other. And we're expecting kids to model that, work with each other, get in groups, but then we don't do that. And they don't see that kind of communication between teachers. So a couple hard questions to bring up, but just start to really ask yourselves and your colleagues, maybe we're part of the problem, and can we fix that now moving forward?
I see people snapping and like popping things in the chat. I wish that could all be audible, because I find it really helpful. Haley, I wanted to make space for you to see if you wanted to add to this question around challenges you perceive in centering the whole child for schools, or even teacher preparation programs, since we've started to talk about that a little bit with what Uriel added earlier.
I think I certainly agree with everything that my fellow panelists had said. One thing I also just want to call out for our youngest children is the phenomena of push down of like these academic, quote unquote, academic kind of focuses and discourse around like school readiness that often really centers on this very minute, small set of knowledge. that is then really limiting what children have access for, and the types of activities and play that is addressing all of who they are and supporting their identities and sense of belonging are like the first things that go in order to try to keep up. And children who are kind of at the intersections of, you know, having a disability, also like say their home language being something other than English, are the first ones to have that taken away also, because that time gets replaced with like intervention. And really kind of that push down of certain of like standards can really take away teachers' ability to address the whole child in the younger grades.
Yeah, I had not heard push down before, but I have seen it and experienced it. And thank you for naming that, sort of academizing early childhood learning that should be exploratory and messy and playful. So thanks for bringing that into the space. We're moving into a segment that we like to do in all our Real Talks, which is a space to offer closing thoughts that connect to things that other panelists have offered. So I'll put again in the chat the question that we always close with, but and you can go in any order as you feel so moved. But the question is, you know, what is an insight that you gained from the work or experiences or comments of another panelist or multiple panelists that you will take with you today? And we just find it really important to sort of connect to one another as a way to move toward a closure.
Urel, I don't know if you're still doing drum power, but we've been talking about it at Hegel, and seeing that video just got me so excited. I just want to know, are you still doing the program? Are you still, if we can get the money and the resources, are you going to be there? That's what I want to take from this panel.
That is a yes. I thought she was joking. I guess you weren't. You really are done.
I'm not joking. No, we've
Okay.
talked about it at the school.
I'm serious. I want to be at the school. I just didn't know if you were done with your comments.
Oh, well, I feel like I've gone on and on, so I want to make sure everybody else has space too.
All right. Well, I'll share some. I think everybody, this has been very inspiring for me. So I'm just happy to be here. I think I took a little something from everybody. I really appreciated when Haley said that made the point around personalizing communities with disabilities, but specifically to center people and experiences, which I'm gonna reinterpret this, but center people and experiences rather than phenomena, right? Like giving folks she said both in terms of how she's teaching, but also research-wise, just creating opportunities to actually experience what people are going through and what people's lives and experiences are like, rather than talking more generally about just, you know, phenomena, things that happen. And I think that's just a super powerful thing just around how you get to human understanding. And I think ultimately these human understandings are how we get to change. Iris and I go way back. She's like my sister in a lot of this work in a lot of ways. And I really appreciate everything she does, but I appreciate it, especially took away today, just the idea of just decentering ourselves, especially as teachers, and letting the children drive. But also, she mentioned briefly, and went away from it, but it's one of the things that I used to like to talk about a lot and like to just focus on, which is that there's a lot of risk taking involved in learning. And it's a huge part of everything that we do, and that we really have to remember to plan for that, to support students in acknowledging that, and to just make it safer to be able to do that. And one way I think to do that as adults is to put yourself in a situation where you're having some lifelong learning, and then you quickly remember that, you know, it's definitely that. No teacher challenge. That's awesome. And from Roberto, you know, the oppressor needing help from the oppressed, that you can't get free of oppression if the oppressed don't
try and meet you halfway, and that means an effort from the oppressor, but then a reception from the oppressed, and that entanglement is super important. And then, you know, that students are multidimensional beings, and in any space, and in any space that doesn't acknowledge that is in fact dehumanizing, right? Because that's not a word we use in education. We talk about engaged, disengaged, but every time I hear disengaged, I do kind of hear dehumanized. And I think maybe if we approach it that way, it might give us a little more urgency. So I'll stop at that, but I appreciate everybody's comments and thoughts today, and energy too.
I'll say one of the things, or I think this is, I've been taking so many notes. And I think one of the things I think about first is kind of going back to what Dr. Lashley said about encouraging, not looking for compliance, but vitality. And in special education, we have so many goals around compliance. And I think to replace those with thinking about how are we supporting children's vitality and their full, kind of to what Roberto was saying, their full like self-actualization and being able to be their full selves. I think would be really powerful as a way of better centering the whole child. And I especially think about how what are perceived as challenging behaviors are often children kind of reasserting themselves and pushing back on deficit positioning in the ways that they are being viewed. And so if we like reinterpret that, I think it can lead to a lot of powerful collaboration with children and with students to be able to better have the education experience be better for them. I think that relates to one of the great things that I got out of Roberto, as I said, of like thinking about self-actualization as being really the first step, and thinking about children or youth and community voices influencing everything and really being a part of policy and curriculum, and there really not being anything without that. And then I just really loved hearing Iris's model, the Kid Nation model. And I think it reminded me in some ways of project-based learning, but I think really extended on that. Like I think it really, because it is more giving children the power. And so in project-based learning, we say like, oh, they can study what they want and we'll develop it around there. But I don't think it's to the extent of children really having the power and having the role of teacher the way that Iris was describing. And so I really love that. And I think it's a way that all children can contribute to their classroom community and show their strengths and abilities and gain a sense of belonging. And so it's really a way that they can really be more fully themselves and add to that classroom community.
It's beautiful. Yeah, no, I just am having a lot of thoughts with the dialogue, with, you know, things that I've read recently. You know, again, it's just a wild time to be alive, you know, and just thinking about the impact of COVID, the disproportionate impact on communities of color. I just read recently that, you know, Black folks make up 13% of the population, yet 34% of all deaths. The Latinx community, we're 84% of the essential workers, and we're getting COVID 5 times the rate of our white counterparts. Thinking about the Navajo Nation, who's been, you know, hit the hardest per capita. Thinking about our Asian brothers and sisters who are feeling the impact of this act of terrorism down in Atlanta. You know, and when we're not looking at, you know, talking about these things in our classrooms, you know, this can be dehumanizing, you know what I mean? And looking at some of the research saying that, yeah, 78% of youth are feeling disengaged. There's a deterioration in their well-being. We're in a moment where we have to pivot. We have to, do what Dr. Love is talking about. We have to do the work so that we can engage the intersectional identities of our young people. We have to do what Iris is talking about. Like, we have to be aware of our own well-being. We have to, work together with other teachers. I mean, what a radical thing if teachers were to check in with one another about how they're doing physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, right? I'm reflecting on an interview that I did at NACA, and this didn't make, the film, but, I'm interviewing one of the educators, and he's telling me about this student that I was getting to know down there named Quincy. And as it turned out, Quincy, showed up to school one day and he brought a weapon, right? And typically in most environments, Quincy would be suspended or maybe expelled. And instead what happened is, one of the staff sat down with Quincy and went through, the wellness wheel, which looks at the 4 dimensions of the self. Like, Quincy, what's going on, man? Are you getting enough rest? Are you sleeping? Are you getting enough food? Man, how are you feeling physically? Are you feeling safe? And Quincy is like, man, look, when I come from the res to school, I'm afraid for my life on the bus, taking the city bus. So that's why I have the knife. And this staff member, in this very healing and restorative way, was like, look, there's organizations that exist in the community that are working to create a more safe space. It's not a punishment. Your opportunity to be restored is to go engage with these community, these organizations that are doing the safety work. And he did, and he got empowered. And pretty soon Quincy comes back and he's leading these groups for young men at the school about, making the neighborhood safe. And he ends up becoming this leader. And I just think, like, some of this stuff is profound, but some of it is also really quite basic. You know what I mean? Like, these young folks are maybe acting and reacting, and we're not understanding, what are the dimensions of their well-being that are being met or that are not being met. And if we could partner with them in getting to the root of some of this stuff, if we could incorporate some of that into our teaching of math and science and building relationship, like, Dr. Urel's talking about, this could be a transformative moment, right? Where we truly, like your video, go from surviving to thriving, right? And these relationships, it kind of sounds cliche, but, relationships take work. We have to do our own intrapersonal work. We have to do that interpersonal work. And I think the real challenge is, can we collectively do that institutional work so that these efforts can be sustained, right? Can we actually, systemically infuse youth voice and community voice into our committees that are identifying social and emotional learning programming, that are defining the policies around discipline, that are, looking at the pedagogy and how teachers are being rated. I think they can do that. We can do that. This is our moment. And I'm hopeful. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding us about this moral moment we're in and the potential for transformation, and reminding us to be hopeful. I'm going to hand it over to our colleague, Dr. LeVar Charleston, who's going to close us out with some words. But a lot of what y'all were saying as you were connecting to each other reminded me of our event next month, in April 22nd, is going to be the 7th in the Real Talk series and the last one of our academic year. It's going to be called Rethinking Schools, Rethinking Learning. It's going to be based on a publication, and 3 of the 4 authors are going to be here: Maxine McKinney DeRoyston, Carol Lee, and Naila Nasir. We'll put a link in the chat to the article, but this is a moment to imagine transformation, and I'm really feeling hopeful. So thank you so much for giving us that. And I'll put more information in the chat, but Dr. Charleston, take us home.
Wow. What do we say? That was a phenomenal panel. And, you know, my fingers weren't moving fast enough to take all the notes and expertise and insights and wisdom from this panel. But as always, I'm ever grateful to have engaged with you all in community today around this really vitally important subject. You know, I've been enriched and have taken some nuggets of wisdom with me that I wholeheartedly plan to employ and implement in my own work. You know, I shudder to think of the academic learning loss, right, that has occurred as a result of the impact of COVID-19 on our school system, on our youth, on our kids. And as we finish out the semester, as we think about looking into the summer and the fall, this idea of centering the whole child, this idea of social emotional learning, it absolutely just has to be a priority. We can't even really think about teaching and learning during crises without attending to our emotions, especially when the science of learning has determined that individuals learn within social context, right? Professor Love reminded us that we can't separate the child from their environment, that interaction is reciprocal. As the environment is changing them, they are indeed changing the environment, right? So in that vein, even our youth's emotions are essential for learning, as our sort of social brains are the leading force in our cognition, right? And the things that we capture and the ways in which we go about living and learning. So, you know, we started this whole series around anti-racism, and that's been sort of something that's been burgeoning lately, you know, and as we think about, you know, as we are engaging in anti-racist practices and culturally responsive teaching and learning practices, you know, we have to ensure that our environments are emotionally safe, supportive yet challenging, and socially and emotionally nurturing, right? We have to make these essential conditions for learning commonplace. It can't be, you know, Mrs. Patterson has a dope classroom, right? It's got to be commonplace, right, for everyone, right? Especially in those spaces, as Mr. Senor Rivera just sort of put out to some of these statistics, right? Those spaces where students have been historically marginalized or minoritized or ostracized, right? What are our current conditions for learning, and how do we augment those to truly center the whole child in teaching and learning? If we took notes from Dr. Lashley, we understand that some solid goals, solid goals, it makes me think of solid goals for our schools and classrooms to target is to create a space where we as educators serve as our students' trusted guide and caregiver, right? We have to create a space where they feel personally connected. How do you do that if we don't know who our students are, as Iris was just talking about, right? They have to find and understand and practice their power. So we know that students can be impacted in a multitude of ways based on what's happening in society, what's happening in their homes, what's happening in schools. So how do we identify and address the stress, the trauma, and or the social and emotional needs of our students, right? Roberto Rivera, through his work, has helped us to identify 3 tenets that are exemplars. That is the impetus to co-create, right? Helping our students to gain the strong cultural identity, the importance of well-being, that is creating and promoting an ecosystem that can nurture the collective well-being, and then understanding that impact of trauma, holding teachers accountable, ensuring students are loving themselves, their peers, and their community. How powerful if we accomplish that, right? How powerful would we be? Would our students be? How bright would our future? This cliche is, how bright would our future be, right? As we're moving more and more, you know, back into the classroom and easing restrictions, not Roberto, because he's in Canada, they ain't easing up nothing. How are we acknowledging the impact, right? That is both the successes and the challenges, right, of virtual learning. Right? Are we thinking about those things, right? Are we taking into account the increase of anxiety, of depression, the 2 most sort of burgeoning health issues our kids are facing today? Are we incorporating that in our practice? How are we developing curriculum that addresses those in a climate in our schools that addresses those? How are we assessing and addressing these issues? Are we providing our students the support they need? Are we providing counseling for our students? Are we training we just talked, Roberto talked about how crazy, how tough times these are. Are we training our staff? Are we identifying students preemptively who are at risk of trauma? As we seek, to understand and employ these sort of innovative approaches to centering the whole child, we have to build partnerships with other programs, with community organizations in this work. How are we, as Senora Rivera shared with us, building alliances across talking about across the world. What are we doing across the street? How are we building alliances and tapping into our community, right? To create this thriving ecosystem that he talked about, the concept of Ubuntu that Iris talked about, that I am because you are, it has prominence where humanity is at the center, right? And so the old adage, it takes a village, has never been truer than today, has never been truer. These are both sources and sites of relationship building enrichment activities and enable us to leverage connections for mental as well as physical health, right? I'm in higher education, right? And so we call it like high impact practices, but I know that I wouldn't be where I am today, first generation, not a sob story, but it is my story, low income, government aid, dude from the hood of Detroit here as an associate dean, right? Like if it wasn't for these sorts of things, because what we're talking about is not only descriptive of success, it's prescriptive for success for our students, right? Dr. Yashley reminded us, that we must move past compliance towards vitality. We know that we serve students who come from working families. So how can we partner to help meet their needs? It's not just the students. It's not just our youth. We're all in this together, it's the entire family, as well as provide students a sense of both safety and belonging. It's knowing that families have an acute understanding of how their children are impacted, like Dr. Love talked about, including with the racism, disability, all those things. They know they're impacted. This is more imperative than ever. And to be sure, we must continue to lift and empower the voices of our kids. Iris talked about this, right? We have to decenter ourselves when we talk about centering the whole child. That comes first. We can't center the whole child if we're centering ourselves, if we're resting on our egos or white Western thought and curriculum. You can't change you can't deconstruct the master's house with the master's tool. So even as we think about these levels of innovation and how to center the whole child, right? We can't do the same thing and expect a different result, right? We got to take a back seat and we have to put the kids in charge. That sounds scary to some people. It sounds empowering to me. I'm gonna keep it real with y'all. What? Let's put the kids in charge. I would say let's put the kids in charge. What? We must help, but in order to do so too, we're helping them, we're helping to provide those tools for them to express themselves, for them to push for change, for them to build strong relationships with adults. These all promote the social and emotional skills that truly embody centering the whole child in our teaching and our learning. We have to co-create, as everybody on the panel talked about, Roberto and other folks, right? And as Dr. Barker said, I had to write this down when she said, whenever possible, giving students the mantle of expertise. What? Stop playing with me, right? Students have told us multiple times, right? They have demonstrated to us that this is how they learn. This is how they learn best, right? That they learn best when we know who they are. That's the first and simple step. When we know who they're, when we make them feel safe, when we hold them accountable, and when we influence them to take ownership in their own development, their own learning, their own growth. We have to be partners with them in this process, as we've heard over and over today. I was with Mrs. Patterson about a couple of weeks ago at the MMSD showcase around anti-racism and innovation. And we heard directly from students the kinds of innovative ways to center them, much of what was talked about today, and their voices, and how that has been having a phenomenal impact on their growth, their development, and their leadership acumen. We ain't just making this stuff up. Right? Yeah, there's a bunch of theories that was thrown out here today. It's a bunch of research and resources. We ain't making this stuff up. It's theory to praxis, as Roberto was saying earlier. Praxis, right? So I truly hope you all, I can go on for W. Y'all got me hype. I'm kind of sweating a little bit. I truly hope you all have gained as much as I did or more from this RTRC adventure. I hope to see you all next month. Dr. Barker talked about this a little bit, rethinking schools, rethinking learning. It's our final RTRC conversation of the academic year, and we'll be bringing together some leading education scholars from around the country to talk about their recent paper that invites us to really reimagine the possibilities for more equitable and engaging models of schooling, both in our communities and around the world. Thank you to all the panelists. I love y'all. To the facilitators, you killed it, Dr. Barker. Special shout out to Dr. Uriel Lashley, who's usually on this side of the fence, but had to share with us his expertise. A special thank you to Justin Brown from OEDI, from the PLACE staff, and to the Wisconsin Center for Education Products and Services, known as WICEPS, and School of Education's Impact 2030 initiative for sponsoring this event. Dean Diana Hess for helping to make this all possible. And as always, I quote this all the time, Margaret Mead, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Thank you all again for coming. Good evening, everyone.